Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. It's Baka here, and welcome to another episode of View Review. This week, we're going to be looking at the brand new movie, The Hobbit. Now, this movie came out on midnight on Friday. It is the prequel to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, both in book form and in movie form. Thankfully, this movie has been directed by Peter Jackson, the same director of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It went through a little bit of a hairy pre-production phase where they weren't sure who was going to direct it. Peter Jackson didn't want to originally do it. Then he came around and he signed on, and they started filming, and it took him a little while to film because they decided instead of one movie, this was going to be 3 movies. Now, I will say this. At first, I was skeptical about 3 movies for The Hobbit. It's a shorter book than any one of the Lord of the Rings books. They did each Lord of the Ring movie in 1 movie and told the trilogy in 3 movies. Now it's a new trilogy based on 1 book that is smaller than either of those books. Now, when the original movies came out, a lot of the Tolkien superfans were upset because of how much stuff got cut out from those books. Well, with 3 movies to tell 1 book, there's very little that gets cut out. There's actually things that get added in. And I'm going to talk about that a little later. So what I want to do is I'm going to look at 4 distinct aspects of this movie, and I'm going to grade each one, and then I'm going to give you guys an overall grade. Now, the first one up will be the story. Now, as I said, this is based on J.R. Tolkien's book, The Hobbit. This is one of my favorite books. The Lord of the Rings is one of my favorite series of all time, if not my absolute favorite. I have read all of the published books and just about all of the unpublished books, the ones that were basically the notes left behind for background and for possible further publication that Tolkien never got around to because he died before he had the opportunity. Now, The Hobbit tells the story of Bilbo Baggins as a young hobbit. He is about 51 years old, I believe, at the start of this movie. And how he gets tangled up in the affairs of 12 dwarves. Now, these are dwarves that are survivors from the attack on the Lonely Mountain by the dragon Smaug. And they are on a quest to retake their home, to vanquish Smaug, and reclaim their kingdom and the treasures therein. Now, Bilbo is brought into this whole fiasco by Gandalf the Grey, played by Sir Ian McKellen. And you get to see if you want to call it the start of the journey, there's quite a bit of journey in this movie. It starts with how they meet, the unexpected party, and it goes all the way through the eagles rescuing them. So you get to see in this movie them fight the trolls and Bilbo buy for time until they can be turned to stone by the rising sun. You get to see them fight the goblins and orcs under the mountain, which I'm not sure, if I remember correctly, it's the Misty Mountains. You also get to be introduced to Gollum, Bilbo finding the One Ring, and the climax of the movie is the fan favorite flaming pinecone scene, where Gandalf starts throwing pine cones that are on fire at the goblins to get them to back off before the eagles can rescue them. So there's a lot of action that happens in this. There's a lot of quiet moments too. And one of the complaints that I've been reading over and over is that there's too little that happens and it's too long. As a huge Tolkien fan, I can appreciate everything that happened. I know it's not for everybody. The quieter parts set the stage for the seriousness of this story. The added parts, you get to see Radagast the Brown, because he's talked about but he never physically shows up in the book. He does not meet up with the dwarves. He does not meet up with Gandalf and get dialogue. Well, he shows up in the movie. You get to see what he's doing in the world, which is more than what you really get in any of the books, and it's great because I always wondered, who is Radagast? What is he doing? Well, they give a great explanation of him. You get to see the foreshadowing of the necromancer, who, I won't ruin it for anyone, but let's just say powerful evil. Plays a much larger part in the trilogy. And you get to see Gandalf's interactions with Saruman and Galadriel and Elrond, and these things get spoken about, but they don't get shown. So the story is amazing to me. I like the pacing. So for the story, I'm going to give it a perfect 10 out of 10. Now next up are the visuals. And this was one of the huge strengths of the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. Weta Workshop made all of these amazing costumes and props, weapons, armor, even down to little things like the pipes, the stitching on the clothing, how there could be special stitching. You get to see all this stuff. And they don't let you down. Now, I had one friend who complained that the interaction between CG and human was a little wonky. I personally didn't see it. Now, granted, this was my first viewing of it. I do plan to see it again next week. And that second viewing, I'll probably be a little more critical, looking for things that are weird. But to me, the visuals are beautiful. You actually, as they smoke their pipes, you got to see the practical use of them. Tamping it with their finger to make sure they got enough smoke. You even got a reference by Gandalf to the Shire leaf Old Toby, which he likes to smoke. And some of the... some of the effects that it can have. It's kind of like marijuana, honestly. But you get to see this, and it's got a kind of a comical thing to it. So, there are a couple parts to the visuals that were a little weird, and to me, it happened to be with the dwarves. Now, in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, you got to see dwarves as the big, burly, giant-bearded warriors, and for the most part, you get that. But when it comes to the main 12, there's a huge disparity between what the dwarves look like. You get some of these classic-looking dwarves, and then you get a couple that are less dwarf-like. They're more human-like than anything. Thorin Oakenshield is one of these. There's not much done makeup-wise or prosthetic-wise to make him look dwarven. His nose is a little bigger, and via camera work, he's made to look shorter. But he's very fit and very much built like a human. And there's another one, Keeley, who is the same way. He's a thinner dwarf. He's more athletic. His beard is just stubble, too, which is weird because the beards pride themselves, or the dwarves pride themselves in their beards. Not the beards pride themselves in their dwarves. The dwarves pride themselves in their beards, and to see that he doesn't really have one, and he's not the youngest of the dwarves, it was a little weird for me. That said, that's a tiny little fraction of the visuals, so I'm going to give visuals a 9.5 out of 10. Next up is the script. Now, for the most part, the script is amazing. They quote a lot of The Hobbit in this. It even starts out when Gandalf shows up. You get the first words that Gandalf says to Bilbo Baggins at the beginning of the book. You get that. You get a lot of great scenes that are very, very accurate to the book. However, and I've read this in interviews of Peter Jackson, he wanted to make this movie a little more lighthearted, a little funnier, because the dwarves are a boisterous lot. So there is a lot of ridiculousness to them. And there's one scene in particular, right before they get to leave the mountain with all the goblins, that there's just some ridiculous one-liners like, well, it can't get much worse, and then the dead Goblin King falls on them and squishes them even more. It's just the little things. So, for the most part, it's really good. I'm going to give it another 9.5 out of 10. And I know I don't normally do a 0.5 on this, but it was really, really good, and there was just a couple flaws that kind of left me scratching my head. There were a couple times where you'd get some witty one-liners that made everyone in the theater laugh. It was pretty good. Last up is the acting. Now, Peter Jackson's very careful about who he picks. When he had the chance for recurring characters that showed up in The Lord of the Rings and characters that show up in The Hobbit, Gandalf, Elrond, Bilbo, he uses Galadriel, Saruman, he uses the same actors. So you get Sir Ian McKellen, you get Christopher Lee as Saruman, you even get, at the beginning of the movie, Ian Holm as older Bilbo, and you get Elijah Wood as Frodo. Now, Frodo is not in the book at all, but you get to see it as Bilbo is writing down his story, and it's the day of the big party. It's the day Bilbo leaves at the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring. So he's writing down this story for Frodo to read at a later point. So Frodo shows up, Bilbo shows up, and then when he actually starts the story, you get a little caption that says 60 years earlier, and it's the main Bilbo of this movie. It's not the old Bilbo. It's not Ian Holm trying to look younger like they did in the flashback scene in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And the younger Bilbo looks a lot like him. The cameos by these guys was great. It was thought out. It wasn't just, hey, let's just put more people in there. Now, I've heard that Orlando Bloom shows up as Legolas. I haven't seen him. I'm guessing it will happen at the end of the third movie, when the Battle of the Three Armies happens. Or maybe it's 5 armies. But he hasn't shown up yet. John Rhys Davies has already said he didn't want to go through the pain of the makeup process to become Gimli. Honestly, there's no point to Gimli being in it. He's not mentioned. His father is in this, and his father is still well, in terms of Middle-earth, he's still a young dwarf. So Gimli would probably be a very young child, so why would John Rhys Davies play Gimli? So, loved the acting, loved the character placements, loved the cameos. I'm going to give acting a solid 10 out of 10. Now, what this does is this brings us up to our final score. And our final score is a 39 out of 40. This gets it a solid A. This is a great movie. I highly recommend it. Go out and see it more than once. Give them more money so that they can make more movies, because why not? They're awesome. So, that's it for this week's View Review. I will be back next week with a weekend workshop. Do not expect a View Review next weekend, because I will be traveling home for Christmas and will be on the road during most of the weekend. So, until Wednesday, this is Baka, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.